Absolutely. Yeah, I'm learning a lot from this.
Since we're heading for the news, why don't we talk about the books? Then we'll go to the news, and we have so much more to ask you. He has 2 books out now, one more book coming out. One is LVAC, L-V-A-C, LVAC Nation. We'll talk more about that. The other is Cobwebs and Ugly Wallpaper. And he has a new one coming out called Don't Get Married Unless You Understand a Few Things First. That's coming out, you said, in a couple of months. Okay, so the first you can get now, you can go to Amazon. You can have them special ordered at a local bookstore. Why don't you go ahead and do that? I'm Mark Kaplan, he's John Doherty, and our guest is Dr. Ferraioli. He is a psychiatrist who not only knows his stuff, but he's very entertaining. He's written 2 books, Cobwebs and Ugly Wallpaper, LVAC Nation. We'll talk more about LVAC. So this is a great job enjoying this, 476-5959. You talked about children. Like, I'm kind of going to head off in a different direction, and we'll get back to LVAC. You talked about marriages and children. When necessary, when people do get divorced, what is the best case scenario for custody? Is it different for each case, or how do you know what is going to be best for the child? Because obviously...
Well, here's the thing. I think we'd all agree that one of the most potentially traumatizing events for the adults and the kids is divorce. It's when people come into my office and they're either in the midst of potentially going that way, or they've already decided and they're really just coming in to process that fact and how to proceed after the divorce. We'll often talk about some of the reasons for the divorce itself, and sometimes that will clarify some custody issues. Now, I don't purport to be a lawyer, so an awful lot of these custody issues get handled not in my office, but in the office of an attorney or down at family court. But I can sometimes at least get a sense or a prognostic indicator of what the dynamics are. For example, if in the marriage there were things like drugs and alcohol involved, which spouse was involved with that? Let's take a look at that. If there was violence involved, physical violence, that would be another. Or if there were things like affairs and things of that nature. These are 3 somewhat poor prognostic indicators. This was an intensive. These are intensive problems that will lead to often kind of a messy divorce situation. One of the biggest challenges post-divorce, regardless of who gets what amount of custody, is co-parenting these children. There is a relationship that has to continue after the divorce. I like to say in my office regardless, but I know some folks like the word irregardless. So whichever one you want to use. So now I don't know if that's a word, but I'll say them both. So that's why I often say both regardless and irregardless. Because that second one's not a word. I'll just often
misunderestimate. I think.
Right. We'll often get, regardless of what went on in the marriage and what caused basically the break of it, we'll get into these kids need to be co-parented in terms of time, in terms of custody. Often that gets dictated in the end by an attorney or by a judge.
But should a couple go to you and maybe work it out with you, and then you can help them work through it, then they would go to the attorney and say, here's what I would like?
Yes, there's an old saying I have in my office, and it goes like this: what we don't settle here goes in the pockets of your attorney over there. It's much more expensive to do it over there. Okay, but no, that's exactly right. We'll often we'll process some of those, some of those built-up resentments and some of those built-up emotions, which are blocking that couple from making these sorts of decisions in the best way possible for the kids and for themselves.
And there are some. 476-5959 is the number here.
Or do you ever have an opportunity prophylactically to get to a couple to talk to them about perhaps how to break the news to their children that they're contemplating divorce?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of the prophylactic approach, in terms of this sort of thing, we do get into how to process this with children, and one of the key points there is, the couple has to do the processing first before sitting down with a child. You really want to minimize any dividing or favoring, daddy's right, mommy's wrong, mommy's bad, daddy's good, that sort of thing. So the couple themselves has a lot of work to do so they can get on the same page before they process this with their child. Remember now, from the child's perspective, they're feeling either safe or unsafe, secure or insecure. They're not dwelling on a lot of the topics where the adults are. The child is feeling it differently. The child's feeling it as, bottom line, am I safe? Am I okay? And that has to be the goal for the couple once they approach the child. They cannot approach the child when the iron is hot between the two of them.
476-5959. Our guest is Dr. Anthony Ferraioli. We're talking about marriage now, but call with any psychiatric issue. You hear so many people say, especially in the past, so-and-so couple stayed together for the benefit of the children. At what point should they not stay together? Or is there something to that? No matter how bad things are, it's better if they stay together. How do you know how to handle it?
Well, here's the deal, so to speak. If a couple is doing one of the three things I mentioned before, actually I have a 3+1 rule, and it goes like this. Look, if they're hitting each other, or they're drinking and drugging, or they're having affairs, those are often deal breakers. This is just from my experience. This is nothing I've made up, or this is just how it seems to go. You try to help them through it, but often those wounds are somewhat fatal. Not always, but often those are serious insults to the trust. The +1 part is willingness to work on it. It's if you don't have, in other words, of those four things, of the 3+1, if none of them are in other words, if the three things aren't present and they're willing to work on it, they're not hitting each other, they're not drinking and drugging, and they're not cheating on each other, and they're willing to work on it, I call that an innocent marriage. That's my term for that. An innocent marriage. We can work on this. Right? Now it's just a matter of time and how the journey goes, and that depends on the couple. That depends on the couple, and sometimes it'll work out, and other times it won't. But if they're not willing to work on it, that's often a deal breaker, because that's where you get the person who says, "Look, I am who I am." It's kind of like the old Popeye cartoons from the '60s. I am what I am, and that's what I am. And take me or leave me. Well, guess what? That's not a true adult, emotionally competent position. The more emotionally competent adult position would be, I am who I am for now, but I'm willing to grow. And let's find out where we're triggering each other and pushing our buttons. When we get married, by the way, and this is what we do, myself included, we all are in the same boat with this. We are marrying that person as if they are a reference point for perfect emotional health. So when they disappoint you, there's an awful lot of resentment and anger that builds right up. See, you're not seeing your spouse as just somebody else's messed up kid, just like you are. You're seeing them as some kind of reference point for emotional health that is not supposed to disappoint you. And in this case, what we're really looking for, when we say soulmate, or we say, true love, in love, all these terms which I have a certain, let's just say I don't use them in my books. Soulmate, I love, but I'm not in love. What we're really looking for in our deepest fantasy is like the perfect parent. You see, this is the problem. You say, it's let me bring you my poopy diaper, and all you're supposed to do is say, "Oh, my baby, I love you no matter what." And that's called unconditional love. And I'm sorry to say it. That is not what we're getting. That's not what you're supposed to get in a marriage. That's what you get from your mom. It may be. Hopefully, most of us didn't. Okay, but unconditional love is not a peer-to-peer thing. That's a parent-to-child thing. That's you bring them the poopy diaper, no matter what you do, they forgive you, they love you. That's the way that is. Right? Peer-to-peer, which would be nice in a marriage. Of course, we don't get it right, but it would be nice if we did. Would be something that I call unconditional positive regard, which roughly translated means benefit of the doubt. It means my wife comes to me, she triggers a button of mine, I feel defensive, but I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. Let me explore this. Let me see before I get real defensive and resentful. Whereas if I'm holding her up to the standard of unconditional love, forget about it. Now I become the victim child who's been wronged, and she's the incompetent parent. This does not make for a good marriage.